raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Men Talking Mindfulness. MTM is a thought-provoking and transformative podcast that delves into the complexities and nuances of the human mind. Our show offers a platform for open, authentic conversations about mental health, mindfulness, and personal growth. We feature leading experts, innovators, and thought leaders from various fields of psychology, psychiatry, and personal development who share their wisdom, insights, and practical tools to foster a deeper understanding of our minds, enhance mental well-being, and inspire personal transformation. Our goal is to challenge stigmas, empower listeners with knowledge, and ignite a collective journey towards greater self-awareness, healing, and overall well-being. And today, we're honored to host a truly esteemed guest, Dr. Frank Anderson, a renowned psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and authority in trauma treatment. Dr. Anderson is a guiding light in his field. His rich experience spans multiple institutions, from serving as a clinical instructor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School to being a lead trainer at the IFS Institute alongside Richard Schwartz. He also holds a long affiliation with Bessel Kolk's Trauma Center, where he conducts training. Driven by his passion for teaching brain-based psychotherapy, Dr. Anderson merges cutting-edge neuroscience knowledge with the internal family system, IFS, model of therapy. An advisor to the International Association of Trauma Professionals, the IATP, and the former chair and director of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, Dr. Anderson's contribution to trauma healing extend far and wide. As a prolific author, he has lent his wisdom to numerous publications in the field of trauma. Most notably, he has recently published a book titled Transcending Trauma: Healing Complex PTSD with Internal Family Systems, which has become a crucial resource for professionals and individuals navigating trauma. Today, we have the privilege to delve deeper into the world of trauma healing with Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson, Frank, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
We're going to have some fun. But before we go any further, I, of course, want to say hello to my esteemed colleague, my co-host and good friend, Will, over there in New York City. Well, good to see you, brother.
Thank you. Feel like a bit of a hot mess today, as we kind of discussed at the beginning of the show. And that's not really true. I just get so excited. I'm really excited for this conversation with Frank today and learning about IFS. And just always do a show and help our audience kind of gain a little bit more knowledge and wisdom and insight. But hey, just please help us grow the show. You can hit us up on social media, Men Talking Mindfulness, or follow us on YouTube, and maybe share the podcast with your friends, which would be great. Or you could even take a little screenshot if you're listening now and post it and say you're becoming more mindful by listening to Men Talking Mindfulness. And also part of our feed, several guided meditations and breath practices that you can access anytime you need them, maybe to enhance your current home practice, or maybe you need a little break in the middle of the day and release some of that stress and anxiety and kind of drop in, get centered, get to the which we're going to talk about today with Frank, and back to what you need. Thank you for tuning in and helping us grow the show. We're going to just start with our 5. This is going to obviously help me a lot. Can you feel a little rushed? We're going to do our 5 breath opening practice. It's all good, you guys. It is what it is. So we're going to ground with these 5 breaths. And this is just an incredible tool. If you're ever feeling a little out of sorts, or just need ground to get more centered and just kind of be a little bit more right with yourself and a little more harmony, just 5 breaths, just like we're going to practice right now, will have an incredible impact on getting you back to the here and now, which is the only time it ever is. So close the eyes, or maybe ground your hands, ground your feet, or keep your eyes open if that's safe for you, or maybe you're driving. Probably a good idea to keep your eyes open. Let's just exhale the breath all the way out to begin. Really push the breath out, 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 out. You can even feel that emptiness as you push the breath out completely. Let's take a big expansive breath in for 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, and exhale out the mouth, blowing out a candle. Push it out, push it out, push it out. Good. Let's do a couple more, or a few more. Inhale, fill the belly deeply. Inhaling. Exhaling. And the exhale is a great opportunity to feel more of that grounding in your body. Maybe relax the face, the jaw, and the shoulders. And again, inhale. We can kind of inhale peace if you like. Think of it that way. Exhale, push out the stress. 2 more. Inhaling peace. Exhaling out the stress and the BS. 1 more in. And let it go. Just take like this little mini moment of reflection and just see from where we were just like a minute or so ago to where you are now, just by grounding with your breath, literally shifting our internal experience from this heightened states of stress and anxiety and down into the here and now of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's what these 5 breaths can do for you. And maybe make some little movements, open those eyes, get excited. Let's have more of a fantastic show than we already are. Dr. Frank, thank you for being here with us today. I'm gonna calm down, guys.
Anything.
Anyway. All right. So where should we begin, gentlemen?
Yeah. So, well, in the intro, I mentioned IFS. I actually, before I did your intro, did the research on the intro, I was not familiar with IFS. So, Frank, I almost called you Dr. Anderson again. Frank, what is IFS, and can you share some insights into the intersection of neuroscience and the internal family system model of therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. So IFS, or internal family systems, really originated as a mode of psychotherapy by, as you mentioned, the originator, Richard Schwartz. It's now this year at the annual conference, this is 40 years in existence. So it's been around for a really long time. It's kind of a grassroots kind of model of psychotherapy, talking about the different parts or aspects of everybody's personality. We all have different parts of ourselves, and these different parts of us serve different functions. Now, back in the day when I was in my residency training program, if you had parts of yourself, you were considered crazy, right? And you were called Sybil, or you had multiple personality disorder. So there's this whole idea of fragmentation or different parts of ourselves as being crazy or pathological or wrong and needing to be fixed. Mm-hmm. And IFS holds a very different view and vantage point of that. We say, no, everybody has different parts or aspects of their personality. It's actually normal, not pathological, right? And that each one of these aspects of who we are serves a different function for us. Like if you're out on the battlefield, you're going to need a certain type of part to show up, right? If you're playing with your kids in the backyard, you're in a different aspect of your personality. Sure. When you're at work, you're bringing a different self forward, so to speak, right? A different part of yourself. So this idea of multiplicity is normal. I did a project several years ago, never got off the ground, with Pixar, for example, with the Inside Out movie.
Oh my gosh, we love that movie.
One of our
favorites.
favorites.
Wasn't that a great
movie? It's actually on our website as a resource.
We recommend it to our audience.
About IFS, that's kind of what we thought. I mean, I worked with them and they didn't know we existed at the time, interestingly enough. But it's exactly that. We all have these different aspects of our personality. Some of them carry pain. We call those the wounded parts. And other parts take on the role of protection because they have to, right? Because of extreme circumstances, because you're in it alone without a lot of support, different parts of us rise to the occasion and will take on a protective role. The problem with that is that they tend to take on protective roles in a somewhat primitive or immature way. If you're a kid growing up in a dysfunctional family, the resources that you have are the resources in your environment. So you may protect by yelling and screaming. You may protect by dissociating or shutting down. You may protect, if you're an adult, by drinking, right? So we're using anything in our environment as a service of protection when we're having to deal with overwhelming problems. So that's ends up being one of the problems that we're here to fix. So many people use rage, obsessing, anxiety, any symptom, right? Any symptom we see as a form of protection, not as bad and wrong and needing to be gotten rid of. And that's a big deal because so much of our culture and society sees all these things as bad and wrong. Stop drinking, stop smoking, stop obsessing, get off your phone. So there's this judgment around our behavior that ends up having people feel like shit, and it makes more shame inside. I'm bad and wrong, right? It activates those critics, those internal critics, like, oh, I'm a worthless piece of shit, right? So we flip it on its head. It's like, hey, maybe that suicide has a positive intention. Maybe drinking has value. Let's see if we can learn about the intention of the part, not the effect it has. You understand that? Right. So we're always looking at the intention. If you're cutting, if you're drinking, if you're shooting meth, hitting your kids, I don't really care what it is. There's a positive intention from the part's perspective. Okay? So that's what we're looking for when we're working with somebody. Is like, how does suicidal thoughts or actions help? And when you start listening, you learn a whole world of information. The meditation that we did in the beginning, just the ability to just stop and go inside is huge. Because most of us spend most of our waking time out. And we never go in. And we never stop to listen. I was thinking when we were doing the meditation, I'm like, wow, this five breath session, 5 breath moment is kind of like a smoke break, right? People go outside, they go out of their buildings or their offices and they take a smoke break. However, a slight difference, right? When we're doing this, we're still inhaling. We are inhaling. That's right. We're inhaling, going inside and getting curious instead of just sitting outside smoking a butt, right? This idea of stopping and going inside with curiosity is a huge paradigm shift. Not judgment and criticism, right? So you stop, you go inside, and you get curious. Why am I yelling right now? What's the value of yelling at my kids, right? And people are often surprised at what they hear if they listen. Oh, yelling at my kids tries to stop them from acting that way. Because if I acted that way when I was a kid, I would have gotten the shit beat out of me. So when I see my kids yelling and screaming and fighting, it activates fear inside of me. It's like, holy crap, if I did that, I would have gotten beaten. So I've got to stop them so it doesn't activate me. One such example, right? Suicide, another one. How could that be helpful, Frank? There's a suicide crisis in the world. Like, we got to stop people, teens, adults, vets, everybody from being suicidal. I say, well, wait a minute. what if we listened to the suicidal part? What if we actually listened to it and heard why it felt leaving or ending is valuable? Because if you listen to suicidal parts, rarely do they want to actually kill themselves. They just want to stop the pain.
Right.
They're really all about stopping the pain. They're the last responders, not the first responders.
Wow.
Suicidal parts are the last responders. So when everything else has failed, they're the ones, the lone helpers, the last helpers, and they carry a huge burden. They carry a huge burden of stopping the pain. And so what we do is we embrace all of these symptoms, learning about their positive intention, and then offering them an alternative solution. Like, what if you didn't have to be suicidal all the time? What if we could heal the pain inside and you don't have to be suicidal? That is a huge offering to these parts, because they're like hamsters on a wheel. They're stuck doing what they do because they have to. And when we listen and offer them an alternative solution, the whole system inside changes. Like, hey guys, which one of you feels worse when you're heard, seen, and validated? Nobody.
Yeah, nobody.
We always feel better when somebody hears us or sees us or validates what's going on for us. The same is true with parts inside. When they feel heard, seen, and known, they relax. They don't get worse. So we're constantly inquiring inside, learning about the positive intention, and offering an alternative solution to a problem that these parts of us are stuck with.
Wow. And these parts, I guess, are these like their own little entities that are within, we have many different parts, but do they only come from, or they kind of arrive and then gain their essence and their energy from traumatic experiences? And then from that traumatic experience, they just keep living with this. He's called like, a hamster on a hamster wheel. They just keep rolling. And I guess the more that we shame them, push them away, instead of embracing them, trying to listen to them, shed the light on them, give them attention. So we have so that's what IFS really does. We get to know these parts and then begin to give attention to these parts. And then even I know as I was researching, then we bring compassion to these parts.
You got it.
And really listen to what they're saying and what they want us to do. Is this kind of the essence of what, these parts, because it sounds like, you mentioned in the beginning, it's not earlier, it would be thought of insanity. And now it's like, wait, because I know, I'm sure John, I know, I got lots of different parts inside of me. I'm like, why is that coming up again? What's going on here? It's like, why, and sometimes they're activated depending on the circumstances. But really, really fascinating when the way you break it down, that it's just a little part of us, but it's how it comes into being is really interesting as well, and how it stays there until we go to therapy, we get to know that voice. And I just wanted to elaborate on that, but it's really fascinating. Thank you for breaking that down.
Let me add a couple dimensions to this. One is just to address two things that you said. One is these parts, we all have parts of us. We're born with them. They're normal aspects of our personality. Okay, so we believe, I have a part of me that's funny. I have a part of me that likes to learn. I have a part of me that, loves to travel, likes to eat and go run. We all have these aspects of our personality. What ends up happening is that they are forced to take on extreme roles as a result of trauma or overwhelming life experience. So I may have a part of me that is smart and likes to figure things out, but it gets rigid and controlling because it has to understand things, otherwise something bad will happen. So parts tend to take on extreme roles as a result of their trauma. Because when we help heal, we don't get rid of any parts. We get rid of the job they were forced into doing. Okay?
Yeah.
So I have one client, fascinating woman who struggles with substance use. She's been drinking for years with her husband. And we're working with a part of her that downs 6 to 8 ounces of scotch every time she gets in a fight with her husband. Why do I do this? Why do I do this? So, and not why do I do this with anger, like, wow, why do I do this? With curiosity, right? She was shocked to hear that this part of her that drinks scotch is 8 years old. She's like, It started at 8 years old? How could that be? Like, 8-year-olds don't drink. Right? She was all up, couldn't understand it. And when we started listening to the part more, this part said, well, when I was a little girl, there was so much fighting in the house all the time. And when Daddy came home from work, Mommy and Daddy went into the parlor and had a cocktail. And every time they had a cocktail, all the fighting stopped.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so this part, as she fights with her husband, reaches for scotch because it's like, oh, scotch is going to solve the problem. When drinking happens, the fighting stops. So it's kind of like that. These parts learn from the environment, and then they utilize it when things get activated inside, right? So that's one thing, is that these parts are normal, but they're forced to take these extreme roles, and they learn it in their environment. You don't become critical unless you grew up in a critical environment. That's not natural. It's what you learn, right? Yeah. You don't dissociate unless you have a reason to dissociate and you've learned it somewhere. So that's a piece that's important. We all have parts. They're normal. It's the extreme roles they were forced to take on when nobody's there and you're left alone to figure out the problem when you're younger or when you're out on a battlefield all by yourself without support, right? The other thing I want to say is the compassion piece. So, and this is where mindfulness and IFS overlaps a bit. And excellent. I'll also say it's where they're different. So I love to talk about differences as well as overlap and similarities. In IFS, there is this belief system that we all have not only parts, but we all have this wisdom in us, this essence that internal family systems calls self-energy. It's compassion, it's wisdom, it's our soul. Call it whatever you want. And everybody has it, right? We're born with it. It doesn't need to be taught. It's a natural quality in every human being. And that is the place from which we heal. That is the place from which we start listening to our parts, right? When we do mindfulness exercises, mindfulness brings you into the present moment. But in IFS, we're also looking to access that inner resource that we believe is in everyone. It has love and compassion connected to it. So we're wanting people, through utilizing mindfulness techniques, to access that space in them that's loving and kind and compassionate. Now, the more trauma you've experienced in your life, the less access you have to that love and compassion. One of my favorite quotes in the book Transcending Trauma is, trauma blocks love and connection.
Yeah. I have that question down here. Yeah, go into that, please. Like, what a profound statement. Trauma blocks love.
Trauma blocks love. Trauma blocks connection. And it is love and connection that actually heals trauma. It's a cycle. Trauma blocks love. Love heals trauma. So the more trauma you have, the less access you have to that loving place within you. I mean, honestly, you guys, I was kind of excited this morning. I was kind of getting ready for this podcast. I was like, men are confusing and confused. Okay?
Yes.
Men are confusing and confused because culture and society does not foster love and compassion in men and culture and society. Be tough and strong, right?
Right.
Which doesn't allow them to access that wisdom, kindness, gentleness within. You're considered weak if you're loving and kind, right? And it's such a problem. I work with so many successful men who don't have any access to their vulnerability because they need to be big and strong and powerful instead of accessing the dimensions of them. It's like I work with big, powerful men that are really little boys inside. I'm constantly doing that.
Many
it's
of us.
like I'm working with all these big little boy men all day long, right? Because the vulnerability, the sensitivity is exiled because of culture and society.
Mm-hmm.
We're taught to exile our vulnerability. So this idea of compassion is particularly loving compassion is hard for men because it goes against all the teachings.
Right.
Right. And it's also what's needed to heal, right? I'd imagine this is what's essential to heal is love and compassion.
You need that resource to heal. It's not the great statement your therapist is going to make. That ain't going to help. I mean, it'll help a little bit. Sorry, therapist. But
or even the drugs, I guess, too, right? The pharmaceuticals. It's just a Band-Aid.
Exactly. It's accessing that space within you. It's having a therapist that can help you access the wisdom within you that is ultimately going to help you heal. The therapist can help you access just like meditation can help you access, right? So we want to have people get used to like, hey, I have this in me. Hey, I do have the resource. It might be hard for me to get it because of the amount of trauma I've had, right? So that's part of the work, and meditation is useful for that. For me, meditation is to help people access self-energy, access their own wisdom, their own healing capacity.
Now, since you mentioned, I mean, the love and how trauma blocks love, and then the inverse of that love heals trauma.
Yes.
And Will and I have both read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
How does trauma get buried in our bodies, and why does that happen? And then how does IFS help with that? Yeah.
So I've been teaching. I just talked to Bessel the other day, yesterday. It was his birthday a couple days ago. I've been working with him for a really long time. He's on the Cape right now. I've been teaching neurobiology of PTSD and dissociation since 1992 for a long time. So we have a very good, clear understanding of the neurobiology of PTSD and dissociation. Stephen Porges, for those of you who know him, he does the polyvagal theory. When we look at PTSD, what we know is that there are hormonal changes that occur as a result of stress, primarily cortisol, that gets released, that is toxic throughout the body and the brain. There are certain hormones that get triggered and activated as a result of stress and trauma, and those hormones set up a whole cascade of things within our brain, within our bodies, that make us unable to process fear, unable to process trauma. You know, mindfulness meditation primarily focuses on the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
In trauma, the prefrontal cortex is temporarily shut down because of cortisol, glutamate, and norepinephrine. So 3 stress chemicals shut down our ability to process or be present with overwhelming experience. And because of that shutdown, because of those chemicals, our amygdala, our an area where we process fear, potently encodes fear memory. So there's no ability to what we call down-regulate. The prefrontal cortex helps us down-regulate overwhelming emotion and overwhelming physical sensations. So when you're freaking out, your body's on fire and your emotions are on overdrive. Prefrontal cortex can help down-regulate that. Trauma blocks the prefrontal cortex's ability to down-regulate. So you encode trauma memory in these moments, and they get really stuck in there. That's what implicit memory is, this unconscious encoding of traumatic memory. So there's a whole physiology around that to learn about, and it helps people to understand, like, I'm not crazy. There's actually something going on in my brain that's not capable of processing emotions or helping myself calm down, right? You want to meditate while you're in the middle of a battlefield? Good luck, because it ain't going to work. It is not going to work. It doesn't, because you're in fight or flight, right? That is not the time you need to be mindful and present, right? Post, you need to process, of course, right? So what IFS does is it helps people get in that state of self-energy, get in that open, loving place, and then to compassionately be with and witness and hear from the parts that have endured the trauma. Because most trauma is experienced in isolation, interestingly enough. The moments of trauma are typically in isolation. Even, for example, I did work at 9/11. I went from Boston, went to New York during 9/11, worked with the Environmental Protection Agency, which was the building right next door to the Trade Center. Every person, even though they were with all their colleagues, were in trauma alone. When you're in life and death, you're alone in your experience. You're overwhelmed. It's when people, so most, the Boston bombings here, like, people that are abused at night, whatever it is, you're out at, this is why your comrades are life-saving to you. Connection is the antidote. Love and connection is the antidote to trauma. But most people experience being utterly alone in those moments. So what we do is try to bring the self to be in connection with the part that experienced the trauma. We have the self give love and compassion to the part that endured the pain. And that's very healing. Once that connection occurs, then there's a capacity to release and let go of what we've been carrying, because we hold that trauma until we don't have to hold it anymore. And it's through corrective experience of love and connection that allows us to start releasing what we're holding. Now, that can happen in an intimate relationship, in a close friend, or internally between the self and the parts. So we really rely on connection, corrective connection, the experience opposite of the trauma. If you felt all alone, to feel loved is important. If you felt unseen, being seen is important. If you felt neglected and uncared about, being cared about is important. You know what I mean? So we're giving the opposite experience of the trauma. Something's happening over there. Somebody's resonating strongly with what I'm saying. I could see it. I could see it.
Will, what do you want to say, man?
Well, no, I mean, you said to be seen. I was like, oh boy, and maybe we'll just speak a little bit of my own experience. Like, I was a middle kid, and with a younger brother that, needed a little bit more help than, maybe a normal kid, a little bit, and my parents were always like, they call me Billy. They're like, oh, he'll be fine. He'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about him, all that. And it was just like, so, and I did, I figured out everything out. I learned how to do so many things on my own. I would just watch, observe, and then do, and then really not have anyone to talk about, or not maybe coddled in the way like my younger brother was, or maybe commanded in the way my older brother was, and I was just in the middle. And and I feel that even in my life now. Maybe this is the reason a part of me does the podcast. I want to be seen. I want to be heard.
Yes.
Oh man, we are unpacking some stuff here.
You got it. That's exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right. Absolutely. Those wounds, Will, that we hold from early on drive most of our decisions in our life.
Wow.
That's a perfect example of that. It does. Those wounds drive most of the decisions. Think about it. If you say you have a large vet population, a lot of people who go into that line of service go in it for a reason that is based to some degree in righting a wrong, right? Yeah, we also pick our partners so that they will give us what we needed and wanted and didn't get in our childhood. So our wounds are very powerful drivers in our lives. And instead of trying to get it from somebody else, IFS says, what if we can show you and help you heal it internally, that your self has the capacity to give that younger part of you what it needed and wanted and didn't get. I talk about two different shame wounds. When you mention being alone, like, oh wow, and it resonates, that's a shame wound. You can get a shame wound from one of two ways in a trauma perspective. One is, you worthless piece of shit. If you're verbally told that all the time, then you're going to internalize, I'm a worthless piece of shit, right? Or if you're neglected, wow, I must not be as important as my brother. I have to do it on my own, right? Those are the ways kids think. And so then you hold up, I'm less than, I'm not good enough, I'm not worth seeing in the same way, right? So we do encode these very powerful messages, and we spend most of our life trying to solve them in all the wrong ways, and a lot of the wrong ways, right? So this is a really good alternative to that,
what you said about a lot of people go into the military for an attempt to right a wrong. What you said earlier resonated with Will. What you said there definitely resonated with me.
Yes.
I served in the SEAL teams for 17 years, in the Navy for 24, and I was born in South Africa and came to the States when I was 7. And I had this really strong South African accent, and I was picked on a lot as a little boy. But I was taller and bigger than my classmates. So when I was picked on, I would beat them down. Which is, terrible to say, but then I developed kind of this, now I'm bigger and stronger. And when I stand up for myself, then I am validating myself.
Yes.
And then I wanted to, there was definitely a piece that wanted to serve the country. Don't get me wrong. I love this country and I want to serve. But there was also a big piece of me that went specifically into special operations. And this is, open kimono right here. So complete transparency, because I had a low self-esteem, because I've been made fun of. But by fighting, that low self-esteem was always corrected, or it felt like, oh, okay, you know what? I'm okay because I can beat people up.
That's right.
Is
That's exactly right.
100%. So with that, you talked about IFS, and we've talked about this family of parts that are inside us, right? what are those parts? So I know we've got the 8 C's of the self, right? And I guess with that, what part is it that I am going into the military to right that wrong? We've got the calm, the creative, connected, curious, clarity, courage, confidence, compassion.
None of those.
None of those
are going into the military.
Uh-oh.
I'm telling you that is not the reason you go into the military, right?
Right.
Calm, curious, compassionate. Those 8 C's are the qualities of self-energy, are the qualities of
it's the power,
wisdom, the compassion, our inner essence, our soul, right? Those are the qualities of our soul, our essence, the capacity to heal. The parts of us, which are different than the self in IFS, the parts are broken down into 3 different categories. One is parts that carry wounds. So I'm unlovable, I'm no good, I'm less than, I'm worthless. Those are our wounds that we carry. And by the way, never met a person that doesn't have at least one of them. Nobody gets away scot-free this way. We all carry some form of wounding, from one reason or another. The wounds, IFS calls exiles, because they're exiled, they're pushed away.
Right.
And then there are 2 different types of protective parts. Parts that protect our wounds or parts that protect our pain. One of them we call preventative or a manager. It works really, really hard to prevent bad things from happening. I'm going to be good. I'm going to make people like me. I'm going to be funny. I'm going to obsess. I'm going to worry. I'm going to drink 1 glass of wine every night, so it just takes the edge off. Like protective parts that are preventative work hard to prevent bad things from happening. It's one way of protection. The second type of part that protects, we call extreme parts or firefighters. Those are the parts that will do anything to stop the pain no matter what. I don't give a shit about anyone or anything. I'm going to drink 8 ounces of scotch. I'm going to beat the shit out of this guy. I'm going to drive my car 150 miles an hour because I'm pissed off and raging. Those extreme parts are called firefighters. But both of them serve a function of protection. So whether you're protecting in an extreme reactive way or in a preventative way, those parts both serve the function of protection. Remember, we get to know them, we appreciate them, we want to learn about their positive intention, and then we get permission from them to access that vulnerability. We get permission from them to access the wound. And then in IFS, there's a whole process around healing the wounds. So once we've gotten permission from those protective parts, because you're not going to get to your vulnerability if you're drinking, a fifth of vodka every night. That's a protector that's saying, I'm not letting you in. No access, buddy. Do you know what I mean? So we need to work with those protectors first to get to appreciate them, to then get access to what's underneath. And we have a way to heal that, which is awesome. We have a way to heal that,
Does this work with, and maybe we'll just talk a little bit about this because I've been kind of understanding this a little bit more and wondering about transgenerational trauma. Is there a way to go inside, like stuff that has been passed to you, like almost genetically, that we can go in and begin to heal these deep wounds that don't even come from our experience, but come from the experience of our ancestors?
And guess what? It's not almost genetically. It is genetically. There are studies now. Rachel Yehuda is one of the people in Albert Einstein in New York who's done a lot of research on what we call the epigenetic transmission of trauma. Trauma
Awesome.
is
Okay.
passed down through the genes. It is.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And it's also reversible, which is the good news. I mean, I can tell you,
Okay.
I have a trauma history, so you don't become a trauma expert just for fun. Let me tell you, it's not a fun job. You become a trauma expert because you have a trauma history.
Is
So
this your
I spent my
manager
whole
speaking
life-
right now, Dr. Frank? Is this your manager speaking right now?
Hey, that is my
just-
truth speaking right now. I have a trauma. I'm in the midst. I'm writing a memoir actually for the general public to tell my story so that people learn. Yes, we have trauma, and yes, healing is possible. It's very important for me. My purpose is to let people know we all have trauma and it can be healed, right? So I know I have a trauma history, and with my oldest son, I can see some of the symptoms some of the ways he reacts is similar to me because of my history. It kills me to see him have some of these symptoms that were passed down genetically. Do you know what I mean? So it really does happen, and it's reversible, right? So we can do that. But getting back to the transgenerational, so Rachel Yehuda did a study with the children of Holocaust survivors. It was like, oh, it's not just the environment that they're growing up in that gives them PTSD. Well, the kids had PTSD partly because of the environment, growing up with parents who survived the Holocaust, but also because of the genetic transmission. So that is actually healable also. Like, I'll give you a personal example. For me, transgenerational trauma. I grew up separate from the abuse I experienced, in addition to. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, very big Italian family. I'm 100% Italian. I grew up in this sea of South Side Irish. Everybody was Irish, and everybody wanted to go to Notre Dame. It was kind of a thing. But my Italian heritage had mafia connections. And we would hear these stories as a kid growing up. You gotta watch out because Uncle Nino's gas station got blown up when he didn't pay his loan back. You gotta be careful because so-and-so's, whatever, so-and-so's dog got beaten when he didn't eat his food like he was supposed to. So, like, I grew up hearing all of these terrifying stories as a kid of the mafia. My dad would say, but they don't, once you take money from the mafia, they own you for life. And I'd never taken a cent. Like, he held a lot of pride in that. And then we heard Uncle so-and-so was a pallbearer for Al Capone at Al Capone's funeral, right? And so we, as a kid, we were a part of this mafia world, right? That was terrifying. I used to go to bed at night. Like, are they going to come and blow up our house? Is somebody going to come and steal all of our money? Like, as a kid, you don't know, right? Oh, I used to read anything I could about Al Capone, looking for my uncle, as I saw all these pictures and newspaper clips. So that was a trauma I carried because of the family that I grew up in, right? And that had a huge impact on my being afraid. I was beaten up as a kid, and I was terrified of the mafia coming to get me. You know what I mean? So I grew up with so much fear. Both of those can be healed. Like, you can heal from childhood trauma, and you can heal from the transgenerational. What I say about transgenerational trauma is you don't need to carry anything that doesn't belong to you. So there's a way to release it and give it back. Sometimes we pass it back through the generations. Sometimes we release it off into the atmosphere. Sometimes we release it in nature, right? There's a lot of ways to release the stuff we carry. We all take messages. We all internalize messages as a kid. Growing up, for me, the men had to support the family. The girls, get married, you don't have to go to school. Like that was a message in our family, you know? So we internalize all these messages and they have an impact on us. And yes, those can be healed. The other thing is we get tons of message from culture and society, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. Men have to be tough and strong, you know, women have to be thin and pretty, or any of these cultural messages that we get. We can release those also. That's a big movement now for releasing cultural, transgenerational, what we call legacy trauma.
So if someone is experiencing this legacy trauma, whether it's cultural or transgenerational, and they're seeking IFS therapy, where do they begin?
Yeah. So the IFS Institute, the website for the IFS Institute is ifs-institute.com. And there's a website for everybody who's been trained in IFS. It's very popular. It's kind of sweeping the world right now. There's maybe 20,000 people on a waiting list to learn how to do this method. It's very popular. I'm one of the lead trainers, as you said. It's really like the impact it's having on the world is very powerful right now. But if you go to the IFS website, you can see everybody who's been trained. Everybody's listed on there. And you know, it's listed by state, by country, by, you know, city and town, and you can see if you can find a therapist who does know this modality. You know, it's really all over the world. I'm going to Oxford, England in September. I'm teaching in China in November. Like, this model is really global at this point, which is wonderful. It, you know, for people, it gives people hope. Like, you don't have to carry this.
Right.
There's a way to heal this. It is not a death sentence or a life sentence. And there is a way to release those overwhelming experiences that have such a profound negative impact in your life. That's why it's so popular.
Understandably. I mean, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, I hadn't really heard a whole lot about it. And now, in doing the research prior to the show and then having this conversation, I want to go and find an IFS therapist like as soon as we hang up.
That's right.
Me too.
It's made a huge, I mean, you know, it's changed my life in so many ways I can't even
unbelievable.
mention it. Like, it's really powerful. It's a powerful modality for healing. And after I wrote Transcending Trauma, I had this moment. It was really kind of powerful. I love to run. It's one of the things I do for stress relief. The book was released May 19, 2021, and I went for a run. And I was like, all right, world, the book is yours. Like, I was worked on it for 4 years. I'm like, now it's yours. Like, send it out to the world, Frank. And honestly, I heard this message. It said, you're to bring trauma healing to the world. I was like, damn, that's a tall order. Like, it's just me. It's just me. I just wrote one book, right? You know? But now I understand that. Like, I'm not the only one who's going to bring trauma healing to the world. That's clear. But I'm one of the people who is put on this earth to help bring trauma healing to the world. And that's an awesome thing to do. I feel really good about that.
Absolutely. You know? Absolutely. And we appreciate, you know, you're coming on the podcast as a part of that journey and a part of that. Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's right.
So we're very thankful for that.
One of many.
Yeah. Fantastic. Will, what else you got, man?
Well, maybe, you know, there's a lot. Maybe could we just touch on, you know, what are your thoughts about like psychedelics? And that, like, bringing up trauma, do you have any information on that? Or, you know, psychedelics have been, you know, they've been used, you know, to heal trauma. I was wondering, like, what your thoughts might be around that.
How many hours do you have?
God, we'll have you back. How's that? So maybe just give us a little brief summary of like your experience and yays and nays or whatever. Yeah.
I'll give you I have a lot of feelings about it. I'm mixed about psychedelics, honestly. I think there's profound potential for doing some major work in healing trauma. Michael Middelfer, if you know him, He's the PI, the principal investigator of MDMA and ecstasy. He's a friend of mine. Him and I took IFS training together, so I know Michael very well. He's the one who's done all the research on MDMA, and he's done some amazing work with vets around healing their PTSD and trauma. So the work that they do is profound, and typically people get into that self-energy when they do MDMA, and then they do these spontaneous healings. So there's this enormous potential. There's enormous potential for it within the field. There's also a lot of people that are using it in the wrong way. This is the flip side of it. There's this, wow, I can take drugs now, and it's legal, right? And there's a lot of people that are using it underground, without the right dosing, without the right support. And what I can say to that is, if you do it under the wrong conditions, just like any treatment, it can make your PTSD worse. I'm working with a client who did underground psychedelics, got 2 pulse doses, and he's been dissociated for almost 6 years now. He's never been able to recover because it was way too much without the right support. You know, there are drugs. They need to be done in a controlled setting. So I hold both, right? Some people use them to treat substance abuse. Other people use them abusively and abuse them as substances. So we got to sort it out. There's a lot of potential and there's a lot of downside.
One thing, like I'd imagine that after doing research on IFS, it does, you know, without any substance intervention, right? MDMA or or even ketamine, I'm sure is helpful, right?
Yes,
there is a certain vulnerability that's necessary in order to get into the parts, listen to the parts, speak to the parts.
Yes.
Well, I'd imagine like substances like MDMA, which it's an incredible experience. I imagine it softens the ego and provides a willingness to go to those places.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you know what ends up happening, one of the things, you brought up something important, Will, when we have people go to those places, we have them go there and not relive it. Reliving trauma is traumatic. So you've got to find the capacity to be with it instead of in it. And some of those psychedelics are very useful in that. For some people that don't have the capacity to be with it in that loving, gentle way, some psychedelics can help them, do that in that way. So yeah, everybody's different. Everybody has different capacities, and there's certainly a benefit for it if it's done the correct way in the right hands.
Amazing. Yeah, I fully agree. It comes back to the set and the setting, right? The mindset in going in, and the setting that you're surrounding yourself with, making sure that you have the support. So I fully agree. Well, I want to respect your time, and I know we're coming up to the half hour that we talked about. Frank, this has been incredibly insightful discussion. We really enjoyed it. We've gotten so much, and like I said, me and Will are probably going to go on. What was it? IFS-Institute.com. Okay. We're probably going to go on there immediately afterwards and try to find an IFS therapist in our area, and I'm sure many of our listeners and watchers are going to do the same. So we hope that the expertise and perspectives have shed light on the complex world of trauma treatment and recovery. And for those of you looking to connect with Frank, Dr. Anderson, or learn more about his work, you can visit his website and make sure I get this right, Frank. It's www.frankandersonmd.com. Is that correct? Did I get it right?
All right. That is correct.
All right, perfect. And if, for all of those, all of us, I will say, who have had trauma, and like Frank said, there's nobody who gets out of this, unscathed without experiencing some level of trauma. And I know something that I've seen is people minimize their trauma. They're like, well, I didn't go to war, so I don't have trauma, and I fully disagree with that. I feel that we all need to acknowledge the trauma that we have had, and that we need to remember the road to healing from trauma is not a journey that you undertake alone. There are resources and professionals like Dr. Anderson ready to guide you towards a path of healing and self-discovery. And with that said, I'm going to jump into our closing practice, and then we'll say goodbye. So go ahead, get comfortable, whatever that looks like for you, whatever is safe physically and psychologically for you. And let's just bring our attention to our breath, noticing the rise and fall of our chest and belly with each inhalation and each exhalation. Breathing in peace and exhaling the stress and the anxiety. Breathing in deeply from the bottom, inhaling all the way to the top, feeling that peace as you inhale, and releasing. Releasing, releasing. Deep breath in. Breathing into the here and now, and releasing. Relaxing, letting go. One final deep breath in together, all the way in. Hold at the top just for a second and relax. Letting it go, letting it go, letting it and everything else go. And go ahead, if your eyes were closed, go ahead and start to blink them open, coming back into this space, this time. Frank, fantastic episode. Thank you so much for this. It has been mind-blowing. So we sincerely appreciate you, and I hope that our audience gets something. I know they will. I know they're going to get a lot out of this. So, Will, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up.
No, just a big thank you, Dr. Frank, for you are in your passion. You know, you are bringing IFS to the world, and anyone listening, I really hope that you seek this therapy because it sounds incredible. I haven't experienced it, but just from what we talked about today, it's just incredibly profound. A different way to get in and deal and overcome and get to know really our trauma. So I really thank you, Dr. Frank, and for joining us today, but also the impact you're having on the world, because and especially what we heard about transgenerational trauma. For me, I was like, oh, can't go to that place, or inaccessible, or something like that. And here's a modality. Any last words, Dr. Frank, before we close?
I just want to thank both of you for doing this, because this is the way we spread healing. When I said that was part of my purpose, that's also part of what you're doing. So I appreciate things like this to help spread the word for people. We've all been through so much, and we all need so much healing. So the more that we can do collectively, I feel like it's the interconnected web of people on the right side of healing, so to speak, right? So thanks for doing this, and thanks for bringing it forward. And I appreciate being on this podcast. So thank you
again. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us. And please, if you got something out of this, please share it with your family, your friends, and whoever else you feel could get something out of this, which, hint, hint, is everyone. All right. Thanks, everyone. Until next time, peace.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.